Well, but the state of our haircuts, lack of haircuts, I think it should be. It means that we
Oh,
haven't taken advantage of July the 4th.
I've had a haircut. I'll have you know.
Had a haircut.
Yeah, I've got it like right up the sides.
Wow. I mean, now you've moved your head slightly to the side. I can see a
Yeah.
bit of a shaved side action going on
Yeah, I
there.
left the top.
Okay. And so that is a bit of inspiration from who exactly?
Um, well, I like to think that it was just me being
Just you.
innovative. But you
Okay.
could compare it to the likes of Ronaldo, I suppose.
Yeah, see, it's weird, isn't it? Because that's exactly who I was thinking of. But it's like, when like the man bun was in a couple of years ago now, like we're going back a couple of years, and people have had different variations of it. But when Ronaldo got it, I was like, he's a bit late to the party, isn't he? And now you've done it, and I think you feel quite late to the party, mate. I mean,
Mm,
it's
well, I don't
is
know.
it
I think I more think that I'm bringing it back in. I've been
okay?
working on it for a long time. It's been a good 6, 7 months of graft.
It has to be fair. I mean,
Yeah.
you got to be respected for that. I mean,
Mm.
is it in fashion at all at the moment? I mean, I obviously wouldn't know, but
I mean, I think it is definitely coming back in. I think definitely, as far as I can tell. I mean,
so you
people
would.
obviously looked at me and thought, okay, yeah, we'll get that again. We'll go with that.
So you're trend setting for the
Yeah,
people
I'd
of
like to think so.
sideways. Okay.
If well, I don't know
You're,
about around here, maybe.
you're a man of the people. To be fair, around five ways, you're probably just taking inspiration from everyone else. That's probably like the most
Were you
common.
referring to a very hip kind of area of
Well, seeing as I'm now out of Brighton and Hove, I kind of look at you as all very hipster down there, as
cafe
opposed
culture?
cafe culture. See, that's a lovely
Yeah.
term there.
No, I can't disagree with you.
Yes, indeed. I mean, have you taken advantage of anything else to do with the lifting of lockdown restrictions?
No, not really.
No?
No, even just walking around town today, it is definitely a lot busier. It's a bit weird seeing people like sitting in at cafes and stuff. Like, it's
Mm.
weird to see that again. But no, I'm not. I mean, I'm not really bothered about going to the pub.
No?
Nah, not for me.
Well, I'm a stereotypical person who has gone to the pub.
Yeah,
I've got to say, maybe it was just the one that I went to,
was it a
but
local?
well, nothing's local around here, is it? Have to make the pilgrimage back to the to the motherland. But no, I just went to Poets and that, and it's weird because it was fine. Socially distancing, but you're with a group of other people, and it felt a lot more like the pub than I thought it would. But I know other people that have gone to other places, and apparently it was a bit more stricter. But not that Poets was lax or anything; it just felt normal.
Yeah,
And I think fair play because I thought it was gonna be pretty terrible. But the fact that obviously it's like it's table service. So if anything, I'd argue that it's an improvement on the
yeah.
pub
You don't have to
because you
get
sit
up.
down, don't have to go to the bar, don't have to queue for ages. You've got a seat. You know that there's not going to be too many people in there. It's not like a maximum capacity or anything.
Would
I
you have
was
to
like,
call them over to then order, or can you? Is it like a phone?
you could do that. But to be fair to them, they're on their feet all the time because obviously, well, I probably need to keep them coming around all the time to try and get some drink money back.
Yeah,
It's been a long old 3 months with nothing coming in,
that's
so they're
true.
around all the time. So it's like you've been waiting on hand and foot.
Yeah,
It's genius.
can't argue with it.
I went there for the 3 o'clock on Saturday, and I thought I would just stay for that game. I ended up staying for the Wolves Arsenal because I just thought, it was genuinely very good.
Can't argue with
So
it.
I am all for the lifting of the lockdown
That does
restrictions.
not surprise me.
Well, mate, it's been a while now, hasn't it? I think we're
Yes,
beginning to slowly get back, but I mean, it's not exactly normal, is it?
it isn't exactly normal, no, but
No.
it is what it is. Life goes
No.
on, as does football.
As
Nothing
does
stops.
football. Mate, that's a lovely segue. I mean, it's certainly one of my playbook that.
Mhm.
Well, so what we're going to do today is we're going to have a little look at obviously the Premier League games that have taken place, but we're now going to go back down to one podcast. I keep doing that, don't I? One podcast a week, going to come out on the Tuesday morning. We're recording this before Spurs-Everton tonight, which is either a good thing or a bad thing. I'm not quite sure where you're concerned because obviously Jose's up for winning his 200th Premier League game, so he might just try that extra little bit harder against Carlo Ancelotti, who he's promised a hug, which I like the way he's said he's going to break some sort of restrictions to do that. But yeah, we're going to go back to one a week, so we're going to have a little look. Obviously, top 4 European races in the Premier League still, so the relegation is still going on. But now Liverpool won the title, it's kind of dropped back a little bit. But what we will do is we'll look at the games that have taken place since the last podcast. Obviously, not too many games, just the weekend's games for this episode. But what has taken place is a couple of main topics that we're going to get stuck into and have a bit of a conversation about. There's kind of 2 things from Aston Villa. There's something that I've picked up on, and it's slightly different to what we'll be chatting about in relation to Jack Grealish. But Dean Smith has said how 5 substitute, the new rule they've introduced during Project Restart, is unfair for smaller squads. I think I understand where he's coming from, and I think I'd argue that I do agree with him. I feel as though they may have had 2 goalkeepers on the bench in their last game, but I know for sure like Burnley have obviously been really struggling with a number of players that have obviously left and they can't name a full subs bench. I think Sheffield United could also only name 7 subs as well. And it's true because the youth teams have finished, their seasons finished ages ago, back when kind of ours did. One of the first things they got rid of was under 23 and under 18 football. So unless those players have still been coming in and training, which is unlikely, although obviously I
think it's unlikely. I think it's quite likely that they would have had a fair number of the academy players training with them.
They would have, but at the same time, I don't think they will be training to the level of the first team. So the last thing that they'll want to do is put a young player out who obviously hasn't been training with the first team squad. Say the 18 has been coming in doing a bit of fitness and, a bit of ball play, whatever. If he then comes in and it's like, oh, look, we've only got 7 on the bench, you want to come along, ends up playing, ends up having an absolute nightmare because he's not up to fitness whatsoever, then I think that's probably where the protections come from. But so do you think that? Do you think that we've seen that it's a thing for the bigger teams to just kind of boast about their squad size?
I don't know. I disagree there a bit just in terms of the fact that I think over the course of the season, a lot of under-23s players train with the first team on a regular basis. So I think that it shouldn't necessarily be an issue because they should have the players there to step in. If it's only 2 or 3, then I think they're definitely going to have that many players training with them on a regular basis with the first team from what I can gather and what I've seen from various people that we kind of know of. But yeah, I mean, obviously it is going to be better for Man City and Liverpool, not even Liverpool so much, but Man City teams where they've got a second 11 that's almost as good as the first 11. So, well, supposedly, but it is obviously an advantage for them. But I don't think it's necessarily something that you can. I feel like they're just clutching at straws a bit. I don't know.
Yeah, but obviously it is the kind of lesser sides. I mean, the difference there is that it's Burnley, who obviously have had quite a decent restart, although they've only really been winning games by the odd goals and been typical Burnley, very solid defensively, and then taking advantage of set pieces and stuff where they can. But, I do get that. But the second thing is obviously Jack Grealish. I watched, and I'm sure you did too, yesterday's game when Liverpool beat Aston Villa 2-0. It was interesting, really, because once again, I didn't think Liverpool were at their best. That was quite obvious, but I was impressed with the way that Villa, they tried not to take the game to them, but they didn't really sit back as much as I thought they would. They had, enough chances, really. I think I remember seeing Douglas Luiz had a fairly decent chance when the ball fell back to him. And they were unlucky, really, that it was 2-0 in the end. I don't think it was that big a margin of victory was deserved. But yeah, the thing is, where it comes to Souness, obviously he's criticised Jack Grealish for basically holding on to the ball too long. As far as I'm aware, he's the most fouled player this season in the Premier League. But, I get because I'm sure you've seen, but Grealish has then...
Yeah, I did see,
on Twitter saying you can't please everyone.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's two sides to it because I think, obviously he is fouled a lot and, that's because he is obviously Villa's best player and he's their talisman and he's probably targeted a little bit. I don't think he necessarily hangs on to the ball too much, but I do think, and this is something that we've been talking about, they've obviously been changing their formation quite a lot. They dropped Samatta. They didn't play with two up front against Liverpool. Probably, that's understandable. You probably wouldn't go and play two up front away at Anfield, but they have been, chopping and changing with their starting 11. And Grealish probably hasn't really been able to get into a run of even his own position because he's played up the left quite regularly, but now he's playing a bit more of a central role. And it's difficult for him because you need to know your runners and you almost need the best teams. You look at Liverpool, and this is something that came up with Spurs because Serge Aurier and Ben Davies have got terrible crossing completion rates. Players like Trent and Robertson, it's second nature to them. Yeah. The ball goes out into those areas. They haven't got a tall front three. So the fact that they score so many goals from crosses is unbelievable. But it's because they work on it. And every single time, depending on which different area they are in the attacking third, they know what kind of ball Trent's going to play in.
Yeah.
And that's the difference when you're Jack Grealish, is because you don't almost trust the players that you've got in a more advanced position than you. So you probably do hold on to the ball a little bit too long. I don't think he does really, but that's kind of where it does end up coming from because naturally he's going to have more time on the ball, which is then going to be shortened because, he's got less options and then he will end up getting tackled.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think, that where he replied on Twitter was with the stat that he is up there with the most chances created in the league. And the fact that they don't score that many goals is obviously an issue. They had more shots than Liverpool yesterday. They've had plenty of opportunities to score goals, I think, in the games that they've played. They've scored more goals than teams like Brighton, Newcastle, Sheffield United. They've scored more goals than all of these teams, but they've conceded the most in the league. So it's a weird one where we're like, okay, well, they don't score goals, but then they also concede lots of goals. And you've got one main guy who's literally trying to carry the whole team. And that's how it seems. And I think also in terms of drawing fouls, I don't think Villa will necessarily, they'll like that. They'll love the opportunity to put a ball into the box where it's kind of anyone's game. If you're going to get your head on the ball and you could score from there, I don't think they'll mind that at all. I obviously wholeheartedly disagree with what Souness says, like I quite often do.
You know what? That's what I was going to ask you. Fairly regularly, we don't tend to talk too much about pundits in particular about what they say, but Souness does come up a little bit because obviously our stance on Pogba, where we're big fans and we think that sometimes he gets unjustified criticism from him. Do you find Souness a bit...
He's like a dinosaur, isn't he?
You know what? He's almost like I don't want to just criticise it for criticism's sake, but it's like football for me has moved on. And I almost feel as though he's talking about a game that almost doesn't exist anymore.
It's kind of like what we were saying about Mourinho last episode. It's that football was so different. Not even when he was playing, but even just 10 years ago, 5-10 years ago, football was so different. Let alone back in when he was playing, and it is just such a different game. And I just don't like the fact that I find him so biased and so just old-fashioned in the way that he speaks about these players like Paul Pogba, Jack Grealish. It's Jack Grealish, he's sought after by all the big clubs in England. There's a reason for that. And he is a very good player. And, obviously Pogba, we spoke about him many times. And it's he always just seems to find that, those comments that, I don't know whether they do it on purpose to kind of make it a bit controversial. I don't know.
It's almost like picking on the most obvious person of a team that's maybe not performing to the level they should be. It's quite an easy get out, isn't it? Because in that list is Buendia at Norwich. I think he's fifth down for the most chances he's created this season. We don't talk about Buendia because even though, you could have a very long, detailed discussion and opinion of the fact that he's not always been in the team. Obviously, he attracts interest reportedly from teams such as Atletico Madrid. He's obviously very important for the amount of chances he's created in a very poor Norwich side. And obviously, you know, if Daniel Farke's not going to play him all the time, but Norwich aren't an interesting club with respect. They obviously don't tick Graham Souness's box.
Yeah.
So when it comes to a player like Jack Grealish, he probably sees someone that's getting, maybe in his opinion, unjustified praise, unjustified interest. You know, people talking about him all the time, big links, Manchester United. And obviously it's the same with Paul Pogba. It's very easy to criticise people who are A, on a lot of money, or B, getting a lot of attention.
I feel like you're bang on with that, and that's what he looks for. And I feel like that's as far as his kind of footballing kind of, I don't know what the word is, but as far as it goes with him is players who are in the media, you know, then he seems to have a big opinion on them. Kind of, it gets drummed up quite quickly. I think we've definitely seen it with players like Sterling over the years, Rashford. You know, he just seems to have an issue with the modern player who's kind of not just there to clean boots in the morning for the older players and then goes to training, you know, puts in muddy tackles. You know, it's not like that anymore. And I don't think he can understand. I don't think he likes it when players are kind of not just all about football anymore, because it's not just about football anymore. There's, you know, they have such a huge social responsibility these days, like these footballers. And I don't think he understands that, and he doesn't like it. And it kind of just shows. And I don't really have any time for him.
It's a shame, really, because I was actually, you know, obviously being the age that we are, you're not really able to appreciate players that have played, with respect, so long ago from when we were born. But I was quite lucky, really, to actually bother to watch some of his highlights, and I was like, wow, he genuinely was unbelievable.
Really?
But as we've said, in what I feel is almost a completely different game, especially the way that we play it. But, you know, moving on, and kind of touching on what I've just spoken about by Buendia and obviously Norwich City, Daniel Farke's been talking today. Obviously, they're back in action during the midweek. And he said that he only thought that Norwich had a 5% chance of staying up at the beginning of the season. This is a team that only spent 750 grand at the beginning of the season. And, you know, I do kind of commend them for it, because they've set themselves up almost like Burnley did a couple of years ago, where they got promoted, obviously went straight back down. But because you didn't spend loads of money, you're in a good financial situation to then try and get back up. And obviously, like Burnley have, they've stayed up ever since. And I don't think Norwich were certainly not expecting to win the league last season. Everything just kind of came together and they've done very well. But I almost feel like it is a bit of a dereliction of duty, especially when you're going to come out now. And even, you know, in his recent, I've been listening to a lot of his stuff since Project Restart has begun. And all the time he's almost saying, like, it's a miracle if we stay up. And they're kind of playing like it. We'll obviously
massively
review in a bit. And, you know, I've got something to say on Graham Potter. And I don't want to be too harsh, but I just feel as though Norwich, yes, they do play nice football. Yes, they are attractive on the eye. But I think they flattered to deceive quite a lot. Although it's a decent style, there's no real substance to it. And now Pukki hasn't scored in 9 or 10 games. You even had to look at the weekend. And, you know, they would have been quite lucky if they got that equaliser 93rd minute, you know, when the ball hit the post. But they've got players on the wing, you know, like Hernandez, and he's strong, he's physical, but I've seen it like a million times over. And I was watching it with a Brighton fan, and I was literally looking at him because he looked like their most dangerous player. He got the ball twice in different circumstances on the left-hand side of the area, went to open up his body where he could almost whip it into the opposite top corner and dragged it to the near post, almost like overthinking it. And I was just thinking, and this is quite harsh, I've seen that player a million times in the Championship or League One. And I was thinking, what separates you to the Premier League? Because I honestly can't see it. And it kind of explains why they are going back down. Because, you know, they've got players, and I can't get my head around this. You've got Max Aarons at right back, Ben Godfrey at the centre half, Jamal Lewis at left back. Then you've got Buendia and Cantwell in midfield. And then you've got Teemu Pukki, Off the top of my head, that's 6 players who I think they could sell tomorrow for at least £20 million each, at the very minimum. So you've got a team that's got a big resale value. And don't worry, this is going to help them when they do get relegated, because they can, you know, probably sell a couple of them and whatnot. But it makes me wonder, if you've got so much interest in these players and, people and other teams in the media making out that they're good players, do you not just think that a little bit of investment in certain positions, certainly a different type of striker to Pukki, at the very minimum, could maybe have given them more of a chance of staying up?
It's weird. I mean, would you agree with that model as a club who's obviously got out of the Championship, which is obviously a really difficult league to get out of, and then just to kind of also almost pessimistically just say, okay, well, we're probably going to go down again, so let's just not bother, in a sense.
I think, yeah, no, I get that, but especially now, and they probably wouldn't have foreseen what has happened in the world, but the Championship is perilous and there is less and less money in it all the time. So I could understand while parachute payments are still a thing. Now, they're not cancelling anytime soon, but the EFL chairman, Rick Parry, does want to get rid of them. So if that was ever to happen, you're certainly going to be in as good a situation, if not the best situation you could possibly be, to do that business model. But I think we've seen plenty of times how difficult it is to get promoted again back out of the Championship. And on their current form, and on having watched them for the entirety of the season, I certainly wouldn't say they're shoo-ins to do, a West Brom and bounce straight back up.
No, I mean, I think they're just mistake after mistake after mistake. They're just, I mean, you're saying, they're trying to play this kind of attractive style of football, but it's costing them goals on so many occasions. And the fact that they don't even score goals anyway, I mean, they've only scored once since the restart, and that was in the FA Cup. They've only had 8 shots as well since the restart on target, which obviously isn't a good stat either. And, the goal against Brighton goes into midfield, tries to play a infield ball, which just went nowhere near any of the players. And, they got counter-attacked on, and then the defending was poor anyway because they let what's his face run across the defender and score. So,
That's bad,
yeah. And it's, it was just, I was just watching it, and I kind of almost have this with Everton as well. So when they're playing the ball around the back, you just don't feel confident in it. You don't feel comfortable watching it because you just feel like, the players aren't of a good enough standard to be playing in the way that, the top teams do from the back. And, fair enough for trying to do it. I understand that, but I just feel like it buys into that whole pessimistic attitude that they've had, where if they, if he said that at the start of the season, 5% chance, I mean, I think it just plays into the fact that they're just kind of setting themselves up to fail, whereas they could have at least devised a different kind of game plan, where, the Sheffield United, you look at their squad and you wouldn't say that it's any better, but obviously they've had a plan that's worked and they've stuck with it and they've gone with it, and Norwich just haven't really, and they've suffered for it, and they are where they are because that's where they deserve to be ultimately.
Yeah, 100%. But even looking at the table now, they're still, I say only, but they are only 7 points of safety. Yes, they're not going to make that now, but it's not like, they've done a derby and they've been cut adrift. So I just think, like I said, it's a bit of a dereliction of duty to hold your hands up and just say, oh, well, we only had a 5% chance of staying up anyway, because quite clearly, they did have a fighting chance of staying up. And it would have been nice to see maybe a bit more fight, especially since football's come back. They've lost their last 5, and
especially since football's come back, because you've seen how badly all the other teams around them have done. So they would have easily had a chance to stay up, because it's going to be 1 point, if that, in it. So it is. It's a shame that they haven't kind of given it a bit more.
Yeah, no, it is a shame. But now, look, just to look through, obviously, the games that we have had over the weekend. So we've had 9 fixtures. Obviously, like I said, we've got Spurs, Everton still to play tonight, which you obviously will now know the result when you're listening or watching this podcast. So obviously, on Saturday afternoon, in the early game, Norwich, as we've just been speaking about, lost 1-0 against Brighton, followed by Leicester's 3-0 win over Crystal Palace, where Jamie Vardy got his 100th and 101st Premier League goals, which genuinely is absolutely sensational stuff. Man United beat Bournemouth 5-2 with Mason Greenwood scoring twice, and I've got to say, absolutely stole the show for me.
Yep.
We're going to get on to Arsenal in a bit more detail later on after they beat Wolves 2-0. We've got Jordan Jarret Bryan joining us from the Football Fans podcast, but also, Channel 4 sports anchor and TalkSport host. So delighted to have him with us this evening. And then in the evening, Chelsea beat Watford 3-0. I'd obviously had a bit too much to drink because I watched that around my mates and I thought it was 2-0. So that's new to me. And then on Sunday, Burnley 1-0 draw with Sheffield United, followed by Newcastle's 2-2 draw with West Ham, Liverpool's 2-0 defeat at 2-0 victory over Aston Villa, and then Southampton's shocking Manchester City with that 1-0 victory, although it doesn't really matter. Just to start,
that game was pretty irrelevant.
It really was. I feel a bit sorry for them because the guy at TalkSport was like, this famous victory. I was a bit like, well, maybe if you're a Southampton fan, you'll be pretty pleased to have won the game. Don't get me wrong. Like, it's always nice to beat City, but you're 13th, even with that win. I mean, I guess you're only, 5 points off a potential Europa League space. You never know, but there's so many teams in between you and them. I don't think it really matters that much. But it was quite nice because, City did play well, to be fair to them, but they couldn't just quite get the ball over the line.
Yeah, that was the problem, wasn't it?
But I quite like that as from a football purist perspective, because you can see when things kind of come off of them and they just pick off Burnley or pick off Liverpool, pick off Arsenal. But then you can see they're doing the same things and it just doesn't quite happen for them. And I quite like that because it's like, okay, there is it can happen. You can kind of defend a little bit, have a bit of luck and end up getting that win.
For sure.
But yeah, I mean, the thing I would like to speak about is we'll just pick out a couple of stories from the games that have happened this weekend. But when I first saw Brighton and Graham Potter, I was really impressed. I thought, he was trying to implement a style of football and a way of playing which was akin to kind of not necessarily Gus Poyet, where it was, possession at all costs, but certainly a lot more pleasing on the eye kind of style than we'd had under Chris Hughton. And for me, watching them at the weekend, I was really frustrated because he was almost playing this box midfield with like 2 CDMs and like 2 attacking midfielders. And it was trying to get Lamptey, a right back, who was brilliant, by the way, and Dan Burn to kind of offer the width and attack. And don't get me wrong, they've won 1-0 away and secured their Premier League status if there isn't a miracle for another year, which you can only commend Graham Potter for. But I don't know, it almost just felt like a lot of the time the centre-backs were having to play the ball between each other because they didn't really have an out ball. And it just felt a bit like possession for possession's sake with no real cutting edge. And I don't want to be too critical because obviously it was a win. But I thought, as we've just been saying, Norwich were really poor. And I would have liked to have seen them really open them up and, play a bit more adventurously. And even the little things like Morpay was playing up front with Connolly. And I just think they're too similar. And, like I said, you can't criticise a team that are going to be staying up this year. But there was more, for me, cause for concern ahead of next year than it was like, this is brilliant. Let's really look forward to next year. Because I still want to see like more variation in his way of playing, and almost like with the personalities that he had on the pitch. You could have played a 4-3-3. You could have said, okay, look, we'll get the ball nice and narrow, and then we'll get wide. We'll really try and get at Aarons and Lewis. We've got backup from Lamptey, who can obviously get forward as well, because they went down the right-hand side umpteen times. And yeah, I'm just not sure from a Brighton perspective. I mean, have you been impressed with what you've seen so far from this year?
Well, I mean, obviously before the lockdown, you wouldn't have said so at all, but they've come back and they've got 7 points from 12. So, something's changed, something's kind of different, even if the way that they're playing isn't necessarily getting the best out of those players. I know we've said before, you asked me the question whether, that kind of staple striker is what they need to make a difference. Is that what you're seeing from the game, that is what they need?
I just feel as though you almost need differing styles. So obviously Murray's on the bench, not getting a look in whatsoever. But a lot of the time, I didn't think Morpay or Connolly played particularly well. I don't think the ball was able to stick on either of them. I was really not impressed with Morpay's movement, but it was quite a lot of times he could have been fed into space and he went to go make the run, then wanted it to feet. And it was like, well, if you get the ball to feet, I haven't seen you do anything when you get the ball to feet. I'd rather you see you latch on to something. So I almost felt as though they needed someone with a bit of a bigger presence up front, and the other players could play off them, because Trossard's already doing exactly the same things as Maupay and Connolly, really. So you've got three kind of diminutive forwards doing very similar things. And you'd almost want to, it sounds very archaic. I sound a bit like Graham Soon there saying get the big lad on up front. But
why
I
isn't
just
he playing?
thought it make more sense.
Why isn't he playing?
Well,
obviously
it's Glenn Murray. He's 35, 36 years old. He's had a long career, obviously in his second stage at Brighton. But the one thing he's never had is any pace. And you've seen throughout this whole season that he just hasn't really been Potter's man. And that's it's hard, isn't it? Because he obviously had a really good year under Houghton last year, and especially the year before when it looked like he'd almost be going to the World Cup if a few things had gone right for him. Obviously, it didn't happen. But that's just what happens. And you kind of get to that age, and I listen to a lot of football podcasts with players that got to a similar age or maybe a little bit earlier. And it's like, that's your year where you need to be called upon all the time. Because, you will sometimes have bad games, but you kind of play to your strengths, obviously, but you really hone what you are good at, because you can't run. You can't do certain things like that. And that's where you need someone to trust you. And that's where you need someone to play you every week. Hasn't had that. You can't really be a bit part player when you're Glenn Murray at 35, 36.
Yeah, no, I mean, it definitely has a bigger effect physically, doesn't it, on when you're at that age, and you can't really come in and out of a team as easily, obviously. So, no, I agree. It is important to have that if you're at that age.
Yeah, on to Leicester. Obviously, Jamie Vardy scoring his 100th and 101st Premier League goals. He's been stuck on that for a little while now. Do you think we'll ever see another Jamie Vardy?
Well, it could be one of us, but no, I mean, it is phenomenal, isn't it? And I mean, fair play to him. He's had a tough time since this restart. Teams have just not allowed him to play, because it's not been anything that he's done wrong. He's not even really had chances. They just have not allowed him to play in the way. And Palace yesterday, they were a bit more open, which did allow him more space. And obviously, it was nice to see him get his 100th goal. And I mean, it's just pretty impressive, isn't it? Considering, you were just seeing non-league videos of him from not even long ago. You just think, what an amazing story.
Sensational, mate. I don't really right now think we'll ever see it again, but then they probably said that when Ian Wright did it. So there's nothing to say that it won't happen again. I guess football's getting further and further away from the average player, average non-league player, due to the sports science and stuff like that. But, he's defied all logic where that is concerned, but he does have a special attribute, and that was pace, obviously accompanied with his finishing. And, I've listened to plenty of stuff, even some stuff this morning with Steve McNulty on another podcast, who's a centre-half who played with him at Fleetwood, just saying, when he first turned up, you're like, who is this guy? Like, baggy tracksuit bottoms, like, just not your archetypal footballer. But, he's been breaking down stereotypes even from back then when he was in the conference. So, and, you saw it when he went to Leicester originally and he struggled, having been the first £1 million player out of non-league, but he keeps on coming back, and that's what you need to be the best. And I'm not the first person to say it, but it is that unshakable self-belief, but it's also with ability, but you've got to be willing to work on it, and that's all he's ever done. And that's why he stopped playing for England, and he's done the right thing there, because it's helped the longevity of his career, and you can never argue with that. And to be honest, the only real thing that I'd like to talk to you about, and it's reminded me of young English strikers. Now, obviously, we did focus on Mason Greenwood in the last episode, but I just was wondering if you'd seen the video of, I think it's behind the goal from the game against Bournemouth. And it's got the clean audio of what the players were saying. And it's like, don't let him turn, don't let him turn. See, I was saying exactly the same thing. Because I'll be honest, I thought he was a pretty left-footed player. Because obviously he does use it quite a lot. Although I had seen him use his right. I didn't think it was a complete one just to stand on. But surely you didn't see that right-footed shot coming from anywhere.
No, I mean, it's so exciting. Like I can't wait for next summer now, where we've got so many young players like him who have just come kind of out of nowhere, and like now is looking like a solid if he can carry this on to start. I think if things go his way, because you just never know, and I think it's so exciting. And he was brilliant. I mean, that game for Man United, I mean, just summed up how. I mean, obviously it was Bournemouth, but they are just dispatching teams like that easily. Kind of, whereas a few months ago, you'd think that they would struggle a bit more against those teams. Again, 4 wins in a row, 16 unbeaten, lovely goals, lovely football, young players, just really exciting. I love it.
Yeah, well, it certainly feels like they're coming back, and it was an important game to win, obviously, with Leicester winning, but Wolves dropping points, although it meant, obviously, Arsenal won, even though they're a bit too far behind, but Chelsea, obviously, then winning as well. You didn't want to fall behind, especially when you went 1-0 down. And you're right, the Manchester United of old, and not even the Manchester United of too old, Ole Gunnar Solskjaer's Manchester United, you've seen them go 1-0 down in those positions and you genuinely worry for them. But I was watching and I never at any stage, even when it went back to 3-2, thought that they were in danger. And that's the sign of a proper team. And that's what they're beginning to get back. And as we keep on saying, it just seems to be setting up an unbelievable season next year. But, who knows? But by the time it's this time next year, the season would have finished. And one of these teams would have probably won it by another 20 points, because the ability to have a title race seems to have escaped the Premier League.
Yeah, no, you're not wrong with that.
It is a crying shame, but hopefully we will have a bit more of one next year. And a team who right now I would say probably won't be in that race is Arsenal, but we will obviously have to wait and see with that one. Bukayo Saka obviously scored at the weekend. Lacazette got another one off the bench, and we will be back, because we're going to record this a little bit later on, with Jordan Jarrat Bryan, who is an Arsenal fan, as well as working for TalkSport Channel 4 and has his own podcast, the Football Fans Podcast. And we will be looking at Arsenal in a bit more detail. So, that is probably going to be the world's worst segue once Lucas gets his hand on editing it. I'm not quite sure how it's going to sound or look, but I back your ability, mate. But obviously you can see that we are now joined by a third person. It is the man that I've been previewing from earlier on. It is Jordan Jarret Bryan. We are honoured to have you on the podcast, my friend, a genuine broadcaster amongst
Thanks for the invite, man.
two people who I don't really know how I can describe them just quite yet. But as I have been saying, you are obviously an Arsenal fan. We've looked at Leicester and we've looked at Manchester United so far on since we're beginning to have guests on the podcast. And we've been quite supportive of Arsenal, me and Lucas. I felt as though you were unlucky against Man City, especially with the early injuries. I don't think that helped you, obviously, and we've seen how well City have dispatched other teams when they've gone up there. The Brighton game was a hard pill to swallow, but it almost right now seems to be like a catalyst to have, started this mini revival, because it's now 3 wins on the bounce.
Well, I think first of all, you've been very kind to us there, because I don't trust this team, guys. I don't trust this team. I will give them credit in that I believe it's 4 wins in a row, 3 league, 1 cup, 4 of them being away. So a win's a win. You take them. But I don't trust this team, because I don't think it's a team that. It feels to me like Arsenal are a top 8 team now. That's what I think Arsenal are. Now, I accept that the recent run is giving a lot of Arsenal fans reason for optimism and reason to believe that, well, actually, we're not that bad and we've got an outside chance of a top 5 slot here. I'm not having any of that. I'm not one of these football fans that's got a short memory. I've got a very long memory, and I don't get overly excited and wet myself when my team goes on a run of 4 or 5 wins, which for me, a big club, by the way, 4 or 5 wins is not a run. And that kind of plays into my point that I don't think Arsenal are a big club anymore. I think the Brighton game you mentioned there, Arsenal weren't awful, but it was surprising to me how many people were surprised that we lost that game, because that game I could replay to you 50 times over the last decade, we've lost that game so many times because Arsenal's game management is very, very poor. We take the lead. I think teams now know when they play Arsenal. I genuinely believe the Graham Potters and the Roy Hodgsons and the Steve Bruces, the clubs from that kind of like 8th, 9th downwards, I genuinely believe those managers tell their teams when they play Arsenal, just stay in the game for an hour. Just stay in the game. Just get to 60 minutes. Even if you're 1-0 down, we'll take that because Arsenal will give you a chance. They will. They will give you a chance. And I think in that Brighton game, people talk about Arsenal being a little bit unlucky because we dominated the ball. Brighton didn't have many chances to score. I think that was intentional. I think the plan was always stay deep, keep it tight, frustrate them, foul them, throw them off mentally, off their game, stay in the game, don't go 2-3 down because then it is over. Stay in the game and we will get a chance to get a point. It just so happened we did a real Arsenal and gave them all 3 points in the end, sort of thing. So as much as there are some green shoots to be taken from the last 3 or 4 games, and by the way, the last 2 or 3 performances have been really good as well, I don't trust this team because despite beating Wolves 2-0 away, where we did play well, we fully deserved to win that game. Actually, we could have won it by more than 2 goals, in my opinion. I could easily see us losing to Crystal Palace next week, I don't know, or Burnley the week after, 3-0 away. And that's why I say I don't trust this team. A team that you trust, a team that you know what you're getting from, you kind of see the defeats as an anomaly. With Arsenal, those losses they're not rare. We've seen Swansea, Palace, Brighton, Wolves, Burnley over the last 5-10 years. These teams have beaten Arsenal, and sometimes at the Emirates. This doesn't happen to big clubs. So while the recent run is good, I'm not getting overly excited. And finally, as well, I'll say, I actually think that I'm conflicted here because progressing in the FA Cup against Sheffield United and the recent one in the league has put the possibility of European football back on the map. I actually think the last thing Arteta needs is 2 games a week next year. I actually think we need to not be in Europe next year. I think Arteta's big strength needs to be coaching. You can't coach if you've got 2 games a week. You just can't do it. So I actually wouldn't mind us losing all the games coming up and just falling out of Europe altogether and just next year going for trying to get back into that top 6/top 4 because I don't think we're going to have money to spend this summer. So he's going to have to coach the players that we've got. We've got some coachable players, but I think Europe actually next year could be a curse in a way that I think some think it'll be a blessing.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting to say, me and Ollie have spoken about this many times on the podcast with the likes of Arsenal, Tottenham, kind of these teams who are kind of pushing onto those European spots. And actually we're thinking they're in a period now where it would probably do them good to not have to play those games. On Arteta, is that an appointment that you were happy with, or is that something that you feel like...
100%, Lucas. I was one of the 4 people on the planet that wanted Arteta when Wenger left. I wanted him then. And I was like, oh, no. He's not managed. He's inexperienced. He's Pep's lapdog. We should get Ancelotti, or we should get Allegri, or we should get, who else was available at the time? Brendan Rodgers. All credible candidates. I wouldn't have been upset had we got any of those guys, apart from Jose Mourinho, who I believe at the time was still at Man United. I think he was at United still. But I wanted Arteta, and I'll tell you why. Because at that point, I felt like Arsenal were at rock bottom. I felt like Arsenal were at a place where things couldn't get any worse. They couldn't get any worse because for me, I'm going to be honest, whether you finish 6th or you finish 10th, for me, it makes no difference. It doesn't really matter. So once you kind of become that club that now is scraping to hang on to top 5, top 6, for me, 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th, it makes no difference. So for me, when you have nothing to lose and when you've hit rock bottom, take a risk, take a gamble. If you've got something to lose, if you're a Liverpool, if you're a United, then maybe you've got to get someone that knows what they're doing and is a proven record. But if you've got nothing to lose, and that's how I saw Arsenal at the time, they have nothing to lose, I just think take a gamble. And I genuinely, the things I've heard behind the scenes about Arteta, I genuinely believe if the board do their job and back him correctly, we could have the hottest, most talented young coach in Europe. but they have to back him. And when I say back him, I don't necessarily mean by giving him money, because I don't think they will, or not big money. Right. I mean back him by, say, giving him autonomy to be able to say, at the end of the season, I'm cutting Ozil's contract. Pay him off. Just get rid of him. I'm cutting Mkhitaryan's contract. I'm cutting, I don't know, Mustafi's contract. I need these guys out the club. They've got to back him to give him the players in the squad that he thinks he can work with. If he can get money on top of that, great. But I don't see Arsenal giving Arteta £100 million to spend. I think the signings of David Luiz indicate that, one, I think he wants to play three at the back next season. And secondly, we're broke. So you either lock down the players that you've currently got right now, or you do without, because you ain't getting no 50 million centre-back coming in the summertime. So I was pro Arteta because I just thought we have take a gamble. You might have the next Pep. You might have the next Poch. You might have the next young hot manager on your books here, rather than going for the tried and tested Ancelotti or Rodgers or Allegri, who we know what they've done. But I just thought those appointments wouldn't be very progressive. Take a risk. So I actually was glad that we did appoint Arteta in the end.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I agree. Obviously, I think maybe a couple of years ago may have been a little bit too soon for him. But the thing with me this year is like it's difficult when it seemed like it was such a struggle from the board's perspective to get him on board. Not to convince Arteta, but there's obviously a lot of people behind the scenes at Arsenal, and sometimes it's the old analogy of having too many cooks. And I would have liked it, just from a purist kind of perspective, if Arteta was just signalled straight away and we're like, right, we're going for that man. Because it almost feels like to me that he's having to convince people above him. And I don't think that's necessarily the most harmonious way that, a football club can be run.
Funny you say that, because I'll tell you two things with that. One, the reason why I rated that was because he's thinking, and he knows he's got a good reputation in the industry as a rising coach. He has got one of the best jobs in world football as Pep's number 2 at Man City. He's thinking from the outside, damn, Arsenal, big club still. This is 2 years ago, but they're a mess. Do I want to go into an environment where I could kill my managerial career before it even starts? So he wanted to make sure that if I'm coming to you guys, it's got to be, I've got to come knowing that you're going to give me the best chance to succeed. We may not win trophies, it might not work out, but I need to come in the door knowing, at least from the get-go, that we're set up to succeed. Again, whether that happens or not, we don't know. But I need to sign that contract, be confident that, okay, I feel comfortable going into this. The second thing is, I know for a fact, he had the job before Emery. Arsenal had all but appointed him when Wenger left. The three were, I believe, Arteta,
Allegri,
Rodgers, and who was the third one?
Allegri, maybe?
I don't think it was Allegri that time. It could have been. There was a third manager. Excuse me.
Might be Luis Enrique,
It might have been Enrique, yeah.
I'm feeling like maybe. Anyway.
And they were going to appoint Arteta. Everything was done. I even heard the press conference was announced. I don't know if you remember back then, it was a done deal. And then all of a sudden, the next day, boom, Emery's in the door. Yeah. It was like, oh, hang on a minute, where'd that come from? Because they bottled it. So part of the reason why I think, to your point, the second time round, he was a bit hesitant was because he didn't want to be dicked around again. Sorry, I can't swear on your pod. He didn't want to be messed around again. Sorry. He didn't want to be messed around again. Do you know what I mean? He wants to make sure, don't make me talk to Man City, get released, and then you blow me out again. It's like a date. Don't invite me on a date, and then you cancel last minute. I'll give you a second chance, and then you're killing me again? No, we're done. You guys aren't serious. So that was, I think, part of the reason why it may have looked like he was interviewing us. Because one, I think it was to make sure that they were serious this time. And secondly, if you kind of put yourself in his position, he wants to make sure that this is good for me as well as it's good for you. Do you know what I mean? My reputation is growing. Yours is diminishing. So I need to make sure that if I'm coming to you, it's right for all parties. And I think in any job interview, I always think that the interviewee, there should be an element of you interviewing the employer. I think that should happen anyway. So I didn't have an issue. I totally get why you say that. But I didn't have an issue with the way it came out and the way the mechanics of how it looked, because it did look to some like, what's going on here? You're little Arteta. Why are you making us beg you to be our manager? But I think he knew that Arsenal were in a weak position and he was in a strong position, and he wanted to make sure that if he's coming in, you're not going to kill my career.
Yeah, I mean, obviously you're talking about him looking at Arsenal, and I mean, from an outsider looking at Arsenal, it's not difficult to see that you need a couple at least big signings, big players to turn that team around. And if you're saying that he's not going to have that money, he's not going to have the opportunity, where does that leave Arsenal for the next, few years until you have that money? Because, the team isn't good enough for Arsenal right now where it is. So where does that leave you?
I think it leaves us in a position where, first and foremost, and I think this needs to happen in the latter years of Wenger. Definitely, I was hoping that Emre was going to deal with this, but I think Arteta is starting to deal with it. It leaves us in a position where the culture has to change. I think we have to work on changing the culture at Arsenal. Arsenal fans get very excited every summer about being linked with Zaha or Benzema or Koulibaly, all these big name signings. I've said for the last 3 or 4 years, the first thing I think Arsenal need to do before they sign anybody is clear decks. Clear the decks. Get the trash out. If you've got mice in your house, the first thing you do is take out the rubbish before you start spraying the fumigating all those. You got 2 bags of rubbish in the corner that have been there for a week. Of course you've got mice in your house. Get the rubbish out first of all, yeah? Get the problem out and then start addressing. It's a bit like America. They need to start again. They've just got to start again. America needs to just reboot and just start again. And I think Arsenal's the same. Arsenal needs to just start again. And part of that process is, before you talk about the people you want to bring in, clear the decks of all the people that don't want to be there, that have passed their sell-by date, and are just in some ways difficult or toxic to the football club. So I think the likes of Ozil, Mustafi, Bellerin, I would have sold Luis, but he's signed now. Socrates, who else? Ozil, and there's a couple others as well I could name, Mkhitaryan and all these guys. Get rid of them first of all. Just look at Liverpool. I think Liverpool are a really good example of where Arsenal need to emulate. Because to win titles, you have two models. You have the money model. You can spend your way to a title, which Chelsea United are doing, or you can actually be a bit shrewd and decide, okay, Liverpool have decided over the last 5 years, okay, we can't spend 200 million every single summer. We can't do that. So we're going to spend it incrementally and very intelligently with a manager that can buy C-list players and upgrade them to B-list, and get B-list players and upgrade them to A-list players. When Van Dijk came in, he was, 70 million? Van Dijk's doubled that now. When Coutinho came to Liverpool, he was, 7.5 million? Yeah. Sold for 140 million. Do you know what I mean? And Ox, he's the value of all those players, he's risen. I think Arsenal have to do a similar thing. Clear the decks first of all, and then bring in a manager that has a plan and support that plan. If I'm being really, really kind of not so harsh, when you really check it, Arsenal are not a million miles away from competing for a top 4 spot again. If you think about it, we've got 2 good keepers, I think. Leno, I don't think he's top bracket, but I think he's a B-list goalkeeper. A B-list goalkeeper can get you top 4. Doesn't win you a title, but can get you top 4. Martinez, I think, is pushing him. Right back, this Suarez guy. Looks decent. Let's see how he gets on. Left back, Tierney, can stay fit. We've got a top left back there. You can get another centre back to go alongside a Louise or a Holding, whatever. That's not an awful back 5.
Got
in
Saliba
midfield. Sorry, Saliba, there you go. Saliba and another guy. Exactly. In midfield, if you can get a party from Atletico Madrid, put him next to a Guendouzi and a Xhaka as a 3. That's a decent 3. And then up top, if you can reinvigorate Lacazette and Andor, Aubameyang, keep one of those guys. You got Martinelli, you got Saka, you got Pepe. It's not an awful team there. I don't think it's a team miles off challenging for the title. But I think, in answer to your question, the first thing Arsenal need to do is change the culture. It's a culture of accepting mediocrity. It's a culture of niceness. It's a culture of loserism. And people always kind of come for saying this because it sounds harsh, but I think it's the legacy of Arsene Wenger. I think we're still in that legacy of Arsene Wenger where we're soft, we're weak, we don't want to be better. Players come because they know they can get a high wage, live in London, and be praised for mediocrity. That's got to stop. So that's the very first thing this summer I would do if I was Arteta.
Yeah, I kind of almost feel as though to be successful right now, you almost need to have a manager and certainly a backroom staff that's trying to create a dynasty, a kind of legacy at the club.
Yeah.
And, I certainly think that Arteta is the right man for Arsenal at the moment, especially because he understands the club. But you're right, he does have, I think, a kind of hard element to him. I think, when he was a player, I think some fans, obviously Lucas, you'll know, as an Everton fan, kind of maybe saw him as a bit unassuming. He was obviously from Spain. Maybe we didn't understand him quite as much, but certainly in his latter years, when he started wearing the captain's armband and you heard him more in press conferences, maybe this is, an age thing for me. But I was like, okay, he's got quite a stern side to him, and you're going to need that as a manager. And I don't think that he's scared to make the big decisions. Now, you've just mentioned something that's very important to me, and we've spoken quite a lot on this podcast about how he's played Nketiah a lot recently, even before lockdown. He obviously likes him as a striker. You've also got Aubameyang. You've also got Lacazette. Now, Lacazette's played at the weekend, scored a goal, played really well. Aubameyang's recently passed some sort of record. I think it was, maybe scoring 50 Arsenal goals in record time or something like that. Now, when you're kind of gutting a club, if you were to do that with a club, like you say, that normally is in the top four, then maybe I'd say keep Aubameyang. But because you're only finishing, maybe even as low as 8th or 9th this season, just because he scored so many goals, do you not think it would maybe, because obviously there's this whole conversation about his contract issue and the situation that's going on there, I don't necessarily think Nketiah is going to be the saviour or the man to score as many goals as him. But I'd just personally like to see Arteta decide on maybe one or two of those strikers and really begin to plan towards them, because he chops and changes all the time. And I'd like to see a bit more of a settled team from him. And I just wonder if you thought maybe it could be time to cash in on Aubameyang.
I totally agree. And it's something that really irks Arsenal fans, because he does score so many goals and he's our captain. But I actually agree with you. I wouldn't push him out the door. I wouldn't actively try to sell him. However, if he left, there wouldn't be any tears on my pillow. Not because I don't rate him, but just because if we can get 50 mil for him, and people always say, you get 50 mil, but you can't buy another striker that can get you those goals. But going back to my earlier point about culture, I think Arsenal need players that want to be there and want to fight for the club. And I'm not questioning Aubameyang's attitude, but the fact that, and he's entitled to try and get the best contracts that he wants. He's our main man, he's our captain, and it's his last big contract. So he's entitled to push for a hard contract. But to your point, if I was Arteta, I'd be looking at it thinking, I want players that really want to be here. I want players that really want to be here. How much do you really want to be here? Or are you only going to sign for the club if we make you the highest paid player at the club? Which, again, from Aubameyang's point of view, I think he's entitled to do. But if I'm Arteta, I'm looking at players. I think Arsenal need players who want to be at Arsenal, who appreciate being at Arsenal, and don't think they're too big for Arsenal. This is why I'd be looking at players like St. Maximin. I don't think he's the best player in the world, but that for me feels like the kind of player that I think is A, gettable, B, I don't think he'd be too big for his boots. I think he would fight for Arsenal. You might only get a year and a half, 2 good years out of him. But I think in that year and a half, 2 years, I think if you can get 12 goals out of him 2 seasons in a row, that's a good return. I don't think he'd cost $1 million, a crazy figure. But that feels like the kind of bracket that a type of player I think Arsenal should be looking at. I think Sayas, the guy at Wolves, I think he's like the left centre back. Someone like him, I like the look of him. I would be looking at players like that. Players that you can bring in. They're not going to be the world beaters. They're not the players that Arsenal traditionally sign. They're not going to sell lots of shirts in the Arsenal club shop. But they'll work hard. They'll fight for the badge. They'll want to be there.
Almost like a Maguire at Man United.
Yeah, exactly. Players that are like, I'm at Man United. What the hell? And they'll give everything. They might not be the best players, but they'll give you 100%. I don't think Arsenal are in a position where they can have players who are the best players in the world, but they're on that certain stature where they know they're the best players. I think part of Ozil's problem is he knows he's the star, so he can afford to play at 70% and probably still play the next game. That's happening less and less now, but under Wenger, that was happening. He knew that he could play okay and play every game of the season. So I wouldn't be angry if Aubameyang was sold. I think Arteta should be driving that decision rather than letting Aubameyang dictate whether he wants to. No. That's the contract offer. That's the deadline. If you don't want to sign it, that's fine. We'll sell you. But this whole dragging it out, I'll tell you when I want to sign. No, not in my house. Not in my house.
Yeah, well, do you know what, Jordan? I think we're almost all kind of in agreement here. And, you know, even as fans of any football club, it's kind of what you want to see. A club with players that want to play for the shirt. I think Sir Maximin's a very interesting one as a Newcastle fan as well. He's obviously, at the moment, too good for us. And I just feel as though, yes, he's the type of player that could eventually move on to the next level. But with like someone like Maguire, as Lucas says there, I mean, that's kind of the player you wouldn't want in terms of how much he's cost, but you kind of want it, as Lucas says, it's his end game. He's playing for the club he wants to play for. And right now, sadly, I think those players will probably think they could then go to a club that's probably on the next level. You're not quite at that very top echelon right now.
Arsenal's that club, for sure.
I think I put them on the same bracket as Everton kind of were a few years ago.
All right, yeah, easy. We're not that bad.
in that kind of in-between stage, kind of that, it's the middle ground before they go to that next club. It's that kind of borderline 7th, 8th, 9th, you know, that you said about. And I think it kind of emulates the same with that in a way.
See, I'd take Gomez as another player that I'm not sure Gomez is quite good enough to play for a City, Chelsea or Liverpool, but I think he is good enough to play for an Arsenal. That as you just said, that Arsenal was at the bridge between an Everton, a Newcastle, I don't know, a Palace, Miljovic at Crystal Palace. Yeah. I would have taken him 2 years ago. But Arsenal fans are snobs. They're like, no, he's not good enough for us. But someone like that in the middle of the park, he doesn't get bullied. He's got quality on the ball. He'll give you 7 out of 10 every week. He's never like going to win Player of the Year, but he'll give you 7 out of 10 every single week. He'll add a bit of steel in the middle of the park. He's a good set piece taker, good passer of the ball, and again, that he feels like someone to me that's gettable in a way that I don't think Ruben Neves at Wolves is gettable. I don't think another player. Example now, Jack Green. Jack Grealish is not gettable for Arsenal. Do you know what I mean? So that's the kind of bracket we should be looking at.
You're right. With a lot of players, it's like it's perception of fans. Especially in like the social media age, you'll see someone that does like one thing, and then his price apparently gets inflated by like £5 million. When Milivojevic is a perfect example because there are plenty of midfielders who are like him, and he is like for me the top echelon for what he does as a midfielder. Even good at free kicks and stuff, because he plays with Crystal Palace, because maybe he's a little bit older and he hasn't been around for years. And, I don't know, I don't want to say anything else, but why maybe fans don't rate him as highly as other players. But, Neves is sexy, he's 22, he's the Porto at 19. It's all about perspective. But do you know what? The one player I will leave you with, and I've been trying to flog him for a while here, it's Fabian Schär at Newcastle, right? Last season, I'm pretty sure he got our player of the season. I'm not quite sure he did get. I'm sure he won many of the football fans awards or whatever we've got up in the Northeast. Now, he played in the back three, and if Arteta's going to play a back three next season, he would be perfect as a right centre-half. Steve Bruce is a traditional centre-half and has obviously taken that into his management style, and he doesn't trust him in a back two, and probably rightly so. But we signed him for $3 million, and last season people were saying he was worth at least 30, and he's the type of player that if you signed him as an Arsenal, fans would be like, why on earth have we signed someone that can't even get a game for Newcastle? But I promise you, he would genuinely be very good in a back three at a proper ball-playing manager's side.
It's not a bad shout. I think those are the sort of players. That's not the worst shout at all. Those are kind of shrewd signings I think Arsenal got to do. Those are the kind of signings and deals that Liverpool did 3 or 4 years ago. Your kind of Robertsons and Coutinho a couple of years before that. People that maybe aren't the shiny new sexy toy, but they can do a job and they can fit into the system you want. That's what football's about now. It's not necessarily about buying the best players. It's about buying the players that fit for your system. Do you know what I mean? That might mean buying, players that aren't on £80 million. It might mean buying someone that's £8 million. But if it fits into your system, that is what ultimately long term will be important. I just feel like, especially now, where I mean, it's ironic now because Arsenal have won a couple of games, and the momentum now and the vibe amongst the fan base is Arsenal can get a European spot, maybe fifth, as I mentioned earlier on. But I would have liked the rest of the season now just been focused on performances rather than results. And that sounds a bit weird. I don't want to lose every game, but I'm looking more at performances. How does he implement his style? How does he decide now in this last 5 games who can play in my team next season and who have I got a biff? Do you know what I mean? And that's why the Wolves performance and Sheffield United performance was encouraging for me, because they were both good performances, I thought. We won the games, yes. But for me, to win things, ultimately, performances are more important. You can win 4 or 5 games in a row and be fluky. That's not sustainable. But if you play well, even if you lose, if you keep playing well, eventually the results will follow. And that's what I want to see between now and the end of the season. I want to see good performances, even if we lose, because ultimately that will give me faith and hope that this team actually can go somewhere.
No, and it's a perfect way to end it off, mate. And it's really interesting, and we've loved having you on, and it's been a really good insight.
Anytime, man. Cheers for getting me on.
Well, and genuinely, man, thank you ever so much. Really appreciate it, and hopefully we'll be able to have you on again another time.
Anytime you want, mate. Anytime you want.
A bit more, some success maybe to talk about Arsenal. They don't just play with some excellent results; they have some excellent performances come the end of the season.
That's what I want.
But genuinely, man, thank you ever so much.
Yeah,
really,
thank you so much.
You're welcome, man.
Lovely. And so we'll catch you next time on the Step Up Podcast.